and then we're going to turn it over
Yes.
to Terry for the training. Ready? All right, so this is going to be on tape for all of those that are viewing it live or going to listen that weren't able to attend here. I'm Laura Webb, and I am sort of the chair of Woman Up. I'm a co-chair or whatever, sort of the, and how Woman Up got started was several years ago. I had come to the chamber, and I was new on the board for the chamber, mostly because I called them on the carpet about 1 year they didn't have enough women on their slate of board members, and one of the incoming chairs said, well, I have an open seat, so you're it. So that's kind of, it was actually my second round on the board, and I said, okay, I'll do it for 1 year, but I brought up saying I think that there's a real need in this community where women, the power of women gathering and learning and inspiring each other, supporting each other, having that network and how powerful that can be. Because that is how I've really learned and thrived in my own world, in my own profession, by the networks of women that I have gathered over the years in my profession or in this community, and it's where I sort of began to blossom and grow and live kind of more my potential, I think. And so I brought it up initially, and they were like, you know, we don't want to do it just for women. And so for years I have been sponsoring, because you know we want to be inclusive of everybody. So for years I've been sponsoring an award. I'd received it years ago. It was the Athena Award, and now it's turned into the Woman Entrepreneur Best in Business. And we had, for the YPA, the Young Professionals Association, they do these lunch and learns. So we suggested, well, okay, why don't we have the 3 previous year winners on a panel, and everybody gets to ask, you know, what's worked, what hasn't, what are your mistakes, what, you know, just given an opportunity. And in this room, they had over 100 people, and about 95 of them were women, and that was the largest YPA luncheon that they had ever had. They had normally had about 20, 25. So it kind of got everybody's attention. I'm like, yeah. And so it was really wonderful. So a lot of pieces came together to begin to create this and to embrace it. And as I said, the kind of whether I have them in the right order or not, but it was to inspire, connect, and support. Those are kind of the things that we want to do. So we started off, and initially, and it sort of morphed into, there are typically 3 events each year. One is a panel of wonderful, powerful women, some that have won some of the Women in Business or Outstanding Female Professional Awards, which Murphy was one of those. And we would do a panel, and that's when everybody got to hear their stories. And if you hadn't been to one of those, it's so powerful. And people are very vulnerable and talk about what's worked and what hasn't. Then the second has been a workshop. And the first year, because so many people like, how do I network? How do I build these networks? And so we focused on that. And then last year we talked about, it was really about, it was actualized leadership profile, I think was the word, but it was basically when you learn what your strengths and what your weaknesses or your shadow side, and when you're under stress, which I think probably everybody who knows me has witnessed that the past month for me, is then some of your behavior not so attractive side come out, and how you can work to overcome those. So that, and then in the fall is basically having where we get to honor and celebrate. And so we're trying to do those things each time of inspire, connect, and support for each of the 3 Women Up events. So you are all part of this, and you're a really, really important part of it. And I'm so grateful to meet new people or connect with new people, to be Velcroed too. So you can help, and part of it is, some of it, everybody who's done this before feels like they learn and grow by being a mentor, but what I originally, when I'd asked, was sort of to pay it forward, to give an opportunity where you might not come to this normally because you might be further along in your career, but how meaningful it is to the other people around, and it gives them an opportunity to connect with people that they may not be around normally. So it's trying to accomplish a bunch of different goals. So that was really how, I don't know if that gives a little bit of a synopsis of how we started, how we got to where we are. I appreciate it, you guys responding and participating. So, I think with that.
So we had a little bit of a snag, and now we're live.
Okay, well with that, that's okay. That's okay. So we want to turn it over to Cherry to be able to do, she's going to help give us the layout, so how this workshop's going to work and what she needs, the roles that we need to play. Is that good enough? Everybody have a book?
Yeah. Just if here have heard of or know anything about appreciative inquiry. Oh, okay, good. And that's probably about half the group. And how many have read Conversations Worth Having? Okay, good. All right. You're going to learn a lot more about both appreciative inquiry and Conversations Worth Having in the workshop. So I'm not going to deliver the workshop to you now. But I do want to give you just a bit about appreciative inquiry, so you have a context for the conversations that you'll get to facilitate at your tables. Appreciative inquiry historically has been an organizational and systems change approach. Traditional problem-solving approach to shifting either an organizational change process or culture or strategic planning has often been to go about it from a problem-solving perspective, or bring consultants in from the outside who talk to people and then they create your strategic plan for you. A SWOT analysis of looking at strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities is done. And in the 1980s, David Cooperrider, who is attributed with the kind of the founding of appreciative inquiry, he was a graduate student at Case Western Reserve. And he was looking for a dissertation topic, and he and a group of the other graduate students had been doing research at the Cleveland Clinic. How many of you have heard of Cleveland Clinic? Yeah, so national reputation, one of the best in the country. And David brought back some of the data and sat with Suresh Srivastava, which was his major professor, and Ron Fry, who was on his dissertation committee, and shared the data that he was looking at. And Suresh said, there's something is wrong, because what they were looking at was a lot of problem-oriented issues at the clinic. And they looked pretty serious. And the conversation that happened was like, nobody with the reputation that the Cleveland Clinic has could have this many issues. And so they took a step back and they looked at the questions that they had been asking of people at the clinic. And they were all problem-oriented questions, because he was trying to find a problem that he could do his dissertation on to solve. And so David went back in with a whole different set of questions. And when he came back, they looked at the data side by side, and it looked like two totally different organizations. And Suresh said, that's your dissertation. And so he began to look into current research around positive image, positive action, positive language, and outcomes, and found this wealth of research across all sorts of disciplines that basically says the nature of our conversations and the direction we move has to do with the images we carry, the things we talk about, our expectations, and how we create things by making meaning together. And so this whole approach for organizational design and development began to emerge around looking at strengths and looking at when are we at our best, and let's do more of that. Or if you're very specific about something, we want to have we want higher productivity. we've got really low productivity. And so appreciative inquiry, and it's in the book and we'll talk about it. Appreciative inquiry would say it's good to find out what are the issues, what are the problems that we need to address, but let's not go after problem solving. Let's figure out from that what is it we want. So if we've got low productivity, what do we want? We want high productivity. So where in our organization do we have high productivity? Let's go study that. Let's go ask questions. Let's find out what are they doing in that area that brings about high productivity. And so the two primary practices that are basic to appreciative inquiry is this positive framing, focusing on what it is that we want. We want high productivity, and asking generative questions, asking the questions that change the way people think or change the images that we hold, because we move in the direction of our conversations and our images that we carry. So that's kind of in a nutshell appreciative inquiry. And as Sally mentioned, I've been working with her and AI practitioners for years doing what became known as the 4 or the 5D process, which you'll read about in chapter 5 of the book. But it's a kind of a method for bringing appreciative inquiry into an organization and engaging in conversations to move in the direction you want to move in. And wanting to bring this to everyday conversation, and I didn't realize everyday conversation was it in the beginning, but wanting to bring this to people so they could use it in their lives on a much more daily basis. And the first time I tried writing about it, I tried to force fit the 4 Ds into it, which was discover, dream, design, and destiny or deliver. And it felt forced fit. But this book came about because Jackie Stavros and I rewrote it with a completely different approach and took it to Barrett Kohler. And Barrett Kohler has published many books on appreciative inquiry. And they're an amazing publishing company. Their mission is to only publish books that will help create a world that works for everyone. And so they really wanted a book that could bring appreciative inquiry into the daily living of people. And they looked at, our editor looked at what we submitted and said, we really would like to work with you. And do you mind rewriting? And he kept pushing back on make it simple, make it simple, make it simple. You can't have 4 practices. People won't do 4 practices. 1, if you can get it to 1, that's good. 2 at the most. And he said, you need some sort of a 2x2, some way to explain. And it wasn't until he was really good at saying, no, that's not it. But he didn't really know what it was. So we kept coming back with more and more. And I really didn't fully grasp what we had in the book until after it was published and I started working with clients with it. And started just engaging with people, and I suddenly really realized it's all conversation. Everything we do is conversation. The systems we create are conversations. Our relationships are grounded in conversations. It's even our own conversations in our head create, are we going to have a good day or a bad day? And so this idea of how do we do that intentionally? And more and more over the last 3 or 4 months, it seems to me that both Jackie and I are being moved to bring this very specifically to women. And I keep hearing from women, just like we heard today, women are going to create the change. You said it in the opening, and I hear that every day now. I hear at least one person say, it is going to be women. And it's going to be women who are changing the conversations we're having on the planet, in the boardroom. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what I'm hoping that will happen at this Woman Up is that women will be able to walk away recognizing not only their own sense of power to impact every single moment of their day just by paying attention to what am I saying to myself and what's my internal conversation, but also how am I shifting the conversation in my relationships when I'm not getting heard in the boardroom and my male colleague has to be the one that repeats my idea for anybody to hear it. How do I ask a different question? How do I change the conversation so that it's not about who's loudest and it's not about who has the best idea, but it's actually shifting the conversation. So on the 22nd, we'll do a little bit of background on appreciative inquiry and then walk through the two practices and what are they, the generative questions and positive framing. And then at every table we will have several cards, and each one will have a scenario on it. And at the tables, groups of 3 will draw a card, and the idea is for the group to together figure out what kind of generative questions could we ask in this situation that would actually shift the conversation. And it doesn't have to mean that it's flipping to the positive. There are 2 things that as facilitators to like listen for. One of them is somebody asking a question that, because they're trying to get to the positive, that they're not honoring where the person is that's talking. Like if somebody is sharing something that is that has been traumatic for them or hurtful, to immediately say, well, what did you learn from it? Or, you know, that's not generative, because instead of changing the person's thinking or images, they feel even more hurt. But a generative question can be one that says, tell me how that impacted you. And as the person's story is heard, to be able to then gradually shift to, where can we go with this? So that you're shifting the conversation from spinning around what happened and what went wrong to honoring the impact of it and how do we move forward. So that's one thing to look for at the tables. The other one, and I've been running into this as I've been sharing this with clients, is that we're kind of trained to problem solve. We've been, from the time we were little, what's wrong with this picture? What doesn't belong? And so people often, they'll see the scenario and begin to ask a question that actually is a question to help solve the problem, as opposed to shift the conversation. For example, so I was working with just a couple weeks ago with a veterinary practice, and the scenario was between a client and someone at the front desk, and the client wanted to get medicine without having the vet see the dog again, because she had just seen them, and she said, the vet said I'll probably need more medicine. And of course, policy is you don't give a prescription without seeing the animal, because what if things have changed, et cetera. And so they're in this argument back and forth, and it's what's the generative question that could be asked that could create a different frame for the conversation, or begin to shift people's thinking. And the immediate insight that the person asking the question was having was to ask a question to help solve this problem between the two people, rather than to ask a question that began to shift the overall conversation. So once she stepped back and stopped trying to problem solve, she asked a question such as to the client, she said, "Are you aware of why it's important for why we have this policy that animals need to be seen?" And the client was like, "No, I'm not aware of that." And so that began to shift. And so at any rate, it's watching out for the problem-solving questions, that the person trying to shift the conversation is trying to be helpful and solve the problem for these people, as opposed to asking a question that almost kind of levels up the conversation to a place where the two people can begin having a conversation worth having instead of spinning in spin cycle. And you should participate yourself at the table in one of these groups. And then afterwards, what we had talked about doing was having at the tables, each of the small groups would kind of act out and show the rest of the people at the table their scenario. So two people might act out the two people that are arguing or whatever the conversation is, and the other person asks a generative question. And what you'll experience is that you can tell when a generative question is asked, because you can palpably feel the shift in the energy. And so as soon as you feel that energy shift, you know that the conversation's now going to go in a different direction. So that little role play doesn't have to keep going on. So just long enough to where people have that shift. And if nobody feels that shift, invite the table to brainstorm what generative questions might be asked in this situation, because there might be some people that are like, I don't know what the question is. So invite them to play with different questions. And the people who are role playing should be able to tell you, that shifted my thinking. But you can usually, even watching it, you can usually feel it yourself. And then after each of the groups at the table have shared, we're going to ask for one or two groups from the audience, not a lot, but one or two, to come up to the front and demonstrate for everybody. So if you have a scenario with really great questions at your table, encourage them or volunteer them to come on up to the front. We probably won't do more than probably two, maybe three, depending on the time. And then afterwards, back at tables, to have a conversation about where in the lives of women at your table, where can they bring these two practices to shift the conversations in their personal lives, in their workplace, and also how might we shift the conversations in our community to begin creating a community that really works for everybody in the community. And so just to facilitate that conversation, and it would be wonderful to collect, if you took notes and collected the ideas that surfaced from that. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. Questions or suggestions. Having listened to all of this, if you have suggestions, yes.
I have a question. So the triad or whatever of people creates this role play and the questions. And then how is it not, I mean, it feels like how can it shift because they know what's supposed to happen, and how do you just not act it and then, oh, look, the shift, whoa. I mean, you know, and then sometimes if I'm in one of those moods, then I'll just like be I don't care what your policy says about the vet thing, I think this is ridiculous, I'm still super angry and you can't get my attention. So what do you do with that kind of dynamic, if that comes
Well,
up, or?
Typically, it doesn't come up, and here's why. I think in setting up the scenarios, it's to really put yourself in that position. And then once you're in that position, don't hold the position, but be the person who's engaged in that conversation. And I think actually to the point of the veterinary example, what the person who was intervening said was, she said, I really hear that it's much more convenient to come and get the medicine, and I get that. And are you aware of what our policy is? Because our doctors, they can't tell you to come do that. You know, we would love to do that, but do you understand why? Anyway, she prefaced it by really hearing the person. You might have somebody that does that, but for the most part, when people are asked a generative question, if it's a real generative question, it is hard to stay committed to this side, because you're being asked a question that invites you to think in a different way. And that releases some of the energy that you're holding on to, unless somebody's just committed to holding that. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
I wonder, Sherry, if it would be possible, and I'm sure your presentation is going to cover so many of these things, so we'll have so much context by the time that we're ready to have these conversations at our table. But I'm curious if you might do a quick model of the triad for all of us before we have to do it at our table. So we'll already get to see that happen?
Yep, and that's exactly what we'll be doing.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, you'll get to see exactly what's being asked by seeing it up front. Thank you. Any other suggestions, questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
And maybe it will be answered by your example, but do you want us to experience the train wreck? Do you want us to begin with everything that might go wrong before we jump into rethinking it?
I'm not, can you say just a little more? I'm not sure what you mean.
The vet and the vet tech, or we have the
Client and the
client
vet.
yes.
Yeah.
And do you want us to have a minute or two of the conversation that's not worth having first?
Yeah, yes, but you don't need a minute or two.
Okay.
20 to 30 seconds is plenty.
Okay, gotcha.
Because, I mean, you want the energy of that conversation to be at play, and then to be able to come in and ask. And sometimes it takes asking 2 or 3 questions, or acknowledging where somebody is first. So it's yes, but long enough for it to be engaged. Yeah.
Just having a thought, because I've been working on this a lot this week, so maybe that's why it's come up, but one of the things I'm finding really useful, and this might be part of your presentation, is to say to people around me, what do you think would be a great outcome of this conversation before you start the role play? What would be a great thing to happen? So, okay, so it's resolved between the vet tech and the client. The client makes an appointment. The client is at least, something like, what would be a great outcome?
Mm-hmm.
And to then start looking at questions, at the role play itself. Because I think sometimes, I don't know about you all, maybe I'm just so naturally negative, which is why I do this work, that sometimes I can't even picture where I want it to go in the moment. It's just like, you're not going to give me the damn medicine?
Right.
Would be, I get my way. Exactly.
Yes.
So, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just wondering if that might be a tip for us, if maybe if the role play either isn't giving us that feeling, or you get sort of bogged down to say, what might be a great outcome? Just that one question,
So
and then before, and then have the role play, have it go into role play.
Okay, so is the, just so I understand, is the,
So I'm not trying to be.
no, I just want to, is the question for the 3 people that are going to do this to say what might be a
Everybody at
great
the table.
outcome?
Aren't we gonna be facilitating like a group at a table?
Well, the tables, I think, are going to be
They're gonna break into
6
two
or
groups of
9.
3 roughly each
Yeah,
table.
at each table. So it'll
Okay,
be
so-
just
yeah,
a
so
group
it might
of
be
3.
So, yeah, I was, I
Okay,
misunderstood. I thought there would be 3 people at a table of 6 who were gonna do it, and other people were gonna watch. So I thought it'd be great to ask
Felt-
everybody at the table, you know, what might be a great outcome of this,
okay,
or potential outcome. So it would be to ask the 3.
yeah. And
Just
then
to think about it for a minute before they start.
they do, they have an opportunity to think through what kind of questions, so they're thinking together as a group of 3 about, you know, what could we do, and then 2 people go into the role play and the 3rd person, so all 3 people are working together to identify several questions that they might ask, and then testing it out to see, does this really work? Do the questions we came up with actually shift my energy? Yeah.
In the past, we've had a script, not a script, an outline of what we should be doing through this process as mentors. Will we get that again?
Yes. Yeah, it'll be at your table.
Well, I took notes, but you know.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, and it's not so much of a script as just,
No, I
yeah,
didn't even mean a script, I
Yeah.
just meant an outline. So
Yes.
we don't miss anything.
yes, good question.
Because I will have slept between now and then.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other suggestions? I like the suggestions people are giving. Questions? Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of playing with Celeste's question, with her question of how will it not be like acting for the people that come up to the front of the room?
Mhm.
And I don't, this is my first woman up, so I don't know like how much risk taking is a part of it, but if it's a part of it, you could say like, okay, who's a pair that like, you know, really got this and are ready to take a risk and come up here and be on the fly, and they're given a new
Oh, that's a
scenario,
great
so that way you
idea.
get a real experience as opposed to a role-played experience.
I like it.
I like that.
I like it.
What about 2 people who are really in conflict?
Who's really mad at each other?
Yeah.
We're not really like
Well, I can imagine a day when they do.
Yeah.
I can imagine a day when that is what we do. It's like the women are in circle and going, let's see it, babes.
Maybe like become like viral of it, 'cause it's like reality TV.
Yeah.
This is the National Chamber of the Year.
They're cat fighting, the next minute they're hugging. I do have a question.
Did I interrupt a question?
Thank you. I like that. Good.
What is the appropriate way to intervene when, you know, it's not going so well, or you're not asking generative questions without, I mean, do we ask generative questions to get them to be more generative?
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
there's nothing wrong with saying, can I make a suggestion? Or try this question.
So we can suggest questions.
Sure, if somebody's struggling with it, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's, and the other ones is to help keep things moving along, that someone sort of takes at least some leadership role if things get stuck. Frequently, they don't get stuck,
Yeah.
you know, with whoever's at your table. But if they do, that at least you're the person as the table mentor to try to help.
I think
Unstick
the
it.
only problem we're gonna have is we're involved in one too.
Right.
So you're gonna have to keep an ear out while you're trying to have full attention with your own group.
Well, and the place where you could probably help and intervene is when the 2 groups that have done this together come together to share, and you notice that what they've decided to ask to shift the conversation really isn't a generative question. That you notice that it's a question that they're really trying to problem solve, or it's a question that has an agenda behind it. And so that's a place where you could, and you'll just be listening at that point. Yeah.
Can you differentiate between having an agenda, going into a conversation with an agenda, and then a statement by focusing on what we want to happen? Can you differentiate the two?
Sure, that's a great question. So the want to happen isn't necessarily the how, right? Or even the specific who or any of that. It's that I want a better relationship out of this, or we want the project we want better teamwork. But I'm not, if I go in and I'm like, I'm committed to this particular thing being done in order to have better teamwork, and I ask a question and it's very clear I want an answer, as opposed to I want better teamwork. And I have some ideas, but I know there's a whole lot more than one way to do that. So what are your ideas for how we can up the ante on our teamwork? That would be a generative question, as opposed to, how could you listen better?
In the book, when he sits down with the two people, one's a productive salesperson and the other is a great example to go to for that. Because the desired outcome wasn't that she sold more and he closed more deals or whatever, but the desired outcome was that they together achieved the success.
Yes.
And so there's some great examples in the book to help you discover what can trigger these wonderful shifts in the conversations. So.
It sounds like it's almost like, and maybe not these exact words, but it's almost like, how do we want to be feeling? How do we want to be being? How do we want to be, instead of like that's, like what do we want to be feeling like? What do we want to be experiencing together and being together?
Or what do we want to be creating
And
together?
creating together.
The generative question is it's really a question you don't know the answer to. If you know the answer, you're not asking a generative question.
Well, that's,
Yes. Yeah.
When I met with you a couple weeks ago, I noticed there was one word you said to me that has come up for me again and again that I've been using. And I think with women, especially, that it works really well. And you said, I was asking you about a problem I had, and you said, why don't you approach it by saying, imagine this. And I've started using that in some of my language, because when somebody says that to me, I feel like then I get to be a part of imagining and creating and investing. And I think it's words, sometimes it's conversations, but it's the word. And sometimes I don't know those words or I can't articulate. And this whole model is so different from anything I've ever done. I don't know about anyone else, but I have never, especially in the business world, this is not the way you approach things. And this is not what's been modeled for me. And so I am striking out to do some things differently. And this is where I think I'm going to be learning this at the same time.
I'm still
I think
learning.
a lot of us are.
Yeah. Yes.
most of us.
Well, including me. I mean,
It's a practice.
it is a
It's the
practice. And I had it cognitively, but until I really started working with this, I'm like, oh my goodness, every word it's almost like every word is sacred because it's manifesting in the world somehow. And that's, Oprah Winfrey's or not Oprah Winfrey, Maya Angelou not speaking for 2 years was because she realized that was the power of her words, got somebody killed. So I'm often not paying attention to what I say. I'm just talking with people. Yeah. So
That sort of makes it intimidating from that standpoint, too. I'm in serious trouble. But I'm trainable.
yeah.
Why'd you look at Murphy? I don't get it.
Does this room feel like at least you have a place to enter to help? I mean, I don't feel like I really know how good I'm but I'm gonna try. And I've read this, so I need to read it again, because I've slept too since I read it.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure at least the people in this room feel like that, you know, you can enter that room with some little better bit of confidence to help.
Yeah.
Because the hope is, I mean, you know, that we'll have, because Leanne in here, I think you guys heard that she sort of helps, is the doer here at the chamber that makes everything happen, but, you know, that we could have 500 people potentially in that room. We've had 350 to 450 before. So that's why we have so many table mentors, and there's a bunch of them that obviously aren't here.
Could you just say simply, like, what makes a question generative? What's meant by the word generative?
A generative question is one that either changes people's thinking, it shifts their thought process, or it creates images of, that are compelling. That, again, those will shift your thinking as well. Yeah, I was going to say.
You know, where we go is determined by where we're putting our attention. And a generative question is placing our attention in a direction with the words we're using to take us to a certain place. So if we're looking at, I can't work with you because I'm so mad about something, and we say, I wonder what we could do together. Or let's focus on an outcome that maybe we won't ever work out together, but that will resolve this. Let's look toward, what if, and it takes you, it shifts your attention. So if you're looking this way, a generative question can help you look toward those mountains, or something that will shift your thinking is what you said, but I generally do that by thinking about, where's my attention right now?
Focus of attention.
And where can I put it, and what question will help me go, oh, look over there.
There's lots of example questions in there, so if your brain freezes, like mine does.
And one of the things that's kind of important for us to bring out is this isn't us coming in together into a workshop where we're gonna change people's minds. But what is so powerful is that if you and I were to sit down and we dynamically have different fundamentals that are at our core of who we are, and we would normally be like this, because of we're being able to stop and ask a generative question, we could still dynamically have core values that are just against each other, but we can still go and see progress toward a shared goal.
Right.
Because we have taken the time to change the thinking, not necessarily change the mind. You might change the mind and get someone on board with you too, and that's great too if that's your goal. But I thought that was one thing that was powerful, is this isn't for me to go out there and, you know, sometimes you get these conversation books and it's like, how am I gonna get you to see things my way?
Right.
And that's so not what this is about.
No.
But it's so much more powerful in the approach that we can take to bring conversations to a meaningful point.
Right. And sometimes the generative question is just my suspending my own stuff long enough to say, tell me how you came to, you know, what your thoughts are. Let me hear your story. And that's a generative question, because when she shares her story, my thinking changes, because I'm no longer fixated on this is who you are. I'm like, oh, there's so much more to who this person is because I've heard that person's story. So it's not just you asking a question to shift somebody else's thinking. You're asking a question that shifts everybody's thinking that's in the...
I've got a question here on the line, and someone says, what if the person is unwilling to respond to the generative question?
Oh.
She said, I don't think this will be a live problem, but I think this is a question.
Yeah. And yes, if sometimes you need to walk away from a conversation, and if somebody if somebody has an intention to stay in a conversation that's negative, and nothing will shift that, or a destructive conversation or a highly critical conversation, and nothing you do, no questions you ask, are shifting them off of that, walking away from a conversation is sometimes the best thing to do. What do you think?
Yeah, I think definitely there are times, and I think particularly when we think about the divisiveness of our political situation, I think if you're in a conversation where someone becomes abusive, that's a time to walk away from the conversation. But a lot of times you don't have any role together, you're just having a conversation. You're not trying to do something together.
Right.
And that's one of the key things for me is, why am I in this conversation? What are we trying to do together? Where are we trying to get together? And if we don't have any of that, then there's a lot more chance that it's going to ratchet up into a lot of conflict.
Right.
You know, if you're talking to somebody that you know doesn't think like you do on
Right.
certain issues.
Yeah. Yeah, asking the questions, what do I want this conversation to be about? And if you can't find common ground on the conversation, then it's okay to walk away.
If it's before the give up, like if it's not yet quite time to give up, I mean, just the reflecting what you hear the other person saying. I hear that it's really important to you that we understand this point. And I'm wondering that like reflecting first can sometimes help to at least settle them into like, oh, I'm gonna see you as a human having a conversation with me, as opposed to just me.
Right.
They want to be heard.
Right,
Exactly.
and I've been heard, that says, I heard you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This be used on teenagers.
Actually, I've had several
Top.
parents talk about how it has shifted their dynamic with their kids.
This is a great example.
Yeah.
Say an outright one.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The scenarios that with the cards that are gonna be on the table, are they gonna be there when we get there?
Mhm.
Okay.
And if anybody at the table is like, I don't need a scenario, I've got one I would like us to use, let them use their own scenario. That's, and I will say that, but if you don't have a scenario, you can draw a card. But yeah, if you've got a scenario, play with that, it's real.
I'm just wondering if I can see the cards kind of.
Oh.
She would be very appreciative.
Yes, they'll be there, you can just look at them as soon as you get there. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's one. Is there any other, anything that you need to say to all of us?
Thank you.
Wrap up?
Thank you
Yes.
very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you to those that are out there watching either online or asynchronously. And if you have questions beforehand, let me know. And if you have scenarios, if anybody has a scenario you would love to have be part of the cards, please either send them to Laura or send them to me, and we'll make sure those get on the tables.
I'll send a follow-up email that has the link, hopefully, to this again, since I jokingly said everybody would say, well, send me the link. I said, well, it was in the first email, but I will do it again. And Cherry's email will be, she's copied on that, so you guys can respond if there's something, a scenario or anything that you think that would be good.
And it can be anything, work-related, family-related, children, community, anything at all. Let's play with real stuff.
As facilitator, table mentors, is there anything different or special we need to do the day of? You want us there early? Is there any, will we be assigned a table?
Yeah, you'll be assigned a table, and, no, I mean, obviously be there, so, I mean, it's always great when you meet and greet, because lots of times people don't know each other, so you can help facilitate that too, interaction to people as everybody's gathering and milling. Can you think of anything else?
No, I think that's, you don't have to come exceptionally early, but be there as a liaison. Well, if you, as the table leader, being there on time means that when someone gets to their table, they're assigned, they've got your beautiful face smiling back at them saying hi. And that makes a world of difference too, because some people knowing what we're talking about might already have a little bit of that anxiety creeping up, and to have that moment to just go, okay, I think you've got a great smile, I'm gonna be okay at this, this will be all right, this won't hurt a bit, I might survive it. And that's powerful for someone who might be a little, or whose boss said, you need to go to this, Because none of us ever have that happen.
Did you say? Because you're not very appreciative. Go to bed.
Well, and I always encourage not sitting with everybody that they know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it accomplishes meeting other people, which everybody says they want to do, but a lot of people are not comfortable, and it makes a little bit better environment. It stretches them in ways sometimes that they need to, and you can help make that as a table mentor. You can make that easier by, you know, hi, and introducing, and oh, have you met so-and-so, and just breaking that ice for them initially can make a big difference. But this is a great opportunity for people, you know, you meet people that you don't know, and for them to meet, you know, meet you too. So we really appreciate it. I know we appreciate your time and you're paying it forward, but I think we're all will be learning from this ourselves. I know I will be. So,
Thank you.
thank you.